Hi, this is the Tropical Tidbit for Wednesday, September 21st. As always, the thoughts in this video are mine alone, and in making decisions, please consult the National Hurricane Center and your local weather office for the best information. Well, it does feel like the peak of the hurricane season now. We have multiple storms to discuss. We're going to start off with Hurricane Fiona. I do want to mention briefly at the beginning here that we have Tropical Storm Gaston over the far northeastern Atlantic. This is over open water right now. It may, in fact, get close to the Azores Islands, and the National Hurricane Center has a good update on that forecast. In the interest of time, we're not going to spend a lot of time in this video on this particular storm, but if you do live in the Azores Islands, please go to hurricanes.gov to see the latest discussion from the forecasters there. There's also Invest 98L, which we will talk about after Hurricane Fiona. And then there's another wave over the central Atlantic, which has a chance to develop over the next 5 days as it moves westward, but only slowly and is not an imminent threat to land areas. So in the interest of time, I will also be skipping that one today. Looking at Hurricane Fiona, this is the infrared satellite loop, and you can see the storm here, clearly defined eye, not fully cleared out, but you can see it there, and a strong eye wall, especially on the northwestern side. Not perfectly symmetric, so if we're looking for perfection here, we're not seeing it, but this is a very powerful hurricane nonetheless. The Turks and Caicos are down here. The storm did pass very close, if not through, the eastern part of these islands yesterday, moving rather slowly on its way toward the northwest, and has now made a turn more toward the north and will eventually turn northeastward on its way toward Bermuda over the next day or two. This is the water vapor satellite loop showing a larger view of the hurricane. There's Bermuda. The storm is now starting to make a track like this, and there is still some wind shear present, so we have a little bit of an upper level trough off the southeastern US and a little bit of westerly flow pushing on the hurricane. You'll see little puffs of cloud elements over the central Bahamas kind of moving out of the westerly direction toward the core of the storm, and you can see a really good one right here on the edge of the core that puffs up and then moves toward the right on your screen. So this shear has not prevented the hurricane from intensifying at this point, but is likely to start putting a ceiling on it as it moves toward the north, and we might be seeing Fiona close to its peak intensity at this moment here. This is the recon aircraft from a few hours ago flying through the storm, showing a falling pressure during the flight down to 938 millibars and very strong winds in the eye wall up to 130 miles per hour at the surface, making Fiona a Category 4 hurricane. Talking about the steering forecast for this storm, this is the European model at 500 millibars showing the break in the ridge that we've been talking about due to a shortwave trough off of New England. And a few days ago, we talked about that passing by, setting a break in the subtropical ridge, allowing Fiona to make this turn north and then northeastward. There's Bermuda right there. This track is pretty set at this point. We've seen over the last 3 days just a slight shift farther west of Bermuda, which is good news for the island, but it will not spare them a strike, potentially even still with hurricane force winds, but for sure tropical storm conditions expected in the island, along with associated high surf, storm surge, and of course heavy rainfall, as the eastern side of Fiona is quite wide. We'll see also a strong upper level trough digging through New England. After that shortwave clears out, we get a bigger trough, and by Friday we start to see a direct interaction between Fiona and this trough. And this is the point as it passes Bermuda, where Fiona will begin transitioning to an extratropical or non-tropical cyclone as it merges with this upper level trough. And then this is going to swing the storm up toward Atlantic Canada. And this is going to be a powerful event. This trough is negatively tilted at this point in the European model forecast. You can see that here, and here's the hurricane. This is a classic positioning for extratropical transition that is associated with a strengthening of the cyclone in certain ways, or at least an expansion of the wind field at the very least, due to baroclinic or non-tropical processes. So while Hurricane Fiona will be losing its tropical characteristics during this portion of its life, it will remain a very powerful cyclone and likely larger than it was when it passed Bermuda. You'll see this swing up into the eastern part of Nova Scotia on this particular forecast, pinwheeling around that upper level trough, and then eventually moving north and northeastward in the vicinity of western Newfoundland and the rest of southeastern Canada. There are some details about this particular track that will depend on exactly when Fiona arrives relative to this trough axis, and therefore how it pinwheels around, whether it hooks farther to the left into central Nova Scotia or whether it slingshots a little bit more straight north into western Newfoundland. But at this point, we do know that an impact to Canada is coming. This is a depiction of what could happen from the H-Wharf model. This is the storm's wind field at the surface represented by the model. There's the Turks and Caicos, and you can see the fairly compact nature of the storm's core at this moment. As it moves forward, you'll see the wind field begin to expand a little bit as it nears Bermuda. This is a function of a couple of things. As storms move north, they tend to expand due to the Coriolis parameter increasing, and we also get a little bit of interaction with that upper level trough just beginning as the storm nears Bermuda. You can actually see the cold front here in this wind shift as the storm begins to move north. This cold front ends up getting intimately involved with the system. You'll see the boundary just off the northwestern quadrant as the storm passes Bermuda. And I'll go back to note here, this is the island's position on this particular forecast. You can see just on the edge of the purple colors, which is hurricane force wind. So definitely a strike on the island, and the wind field on the southeast side is quite expansive. So Bermuda will not avoid all of it, and potentially even hurricane force winds will impact the island. Now the storm interacts with the cold front. You'll see it move up and even expand further and remain hurricane force even as the cold front gets intimately drawn into the system. We start to transition into a frontal cyclone as the system moves up toward Nova Scotia, and we see a very large and powerful cyclone. Max winds will likely come down here, but are still 90 miles per hour on this particular model run at this time as the system nears landfall. But we get strong winds coming out of the north, winds coming out of the south over a large area, both Nova Scotia and Newfoundland getting affected here, and wide-ranging impacts and severe ones will be possible across a large area of southeastern Canada. This is the forecast from the National Hurricane Center showing the track that we just described, moving toward the northeast and accelerating, moving faster here as we get past Bermuda sometime on Friday morning, overnight Thursday night, and Thursday evening is when the first arrival of strong winds and higher surf will likely begin. And then it'll only take a day between here and Canada. The system will be moving quite quickly, and you can see that it remains hurricane force with that letter H there, but a white filled circle just means that this is now a non-tropical cyclone at the time that it arrives in Canada, but it will still have hurricane force winds and wide-ranging impacts regardless of the fact that it is not technically tropical at that time. This is Saturday morning on this particular forecast. The timing is probably pretty good at this point, but it will be a large cyclone, so high winds and waves will arrive well in advance of this time. This is a swath showing the timing of arrival of tropical storm force winds. You can see that in Bermuda, again, this is Thursday evening, overnight Thursday night is when they arrive, and then you can see Bermuda in the purple color there indicating a 90% chance of tropical storm force winds over 40 miles per hour happening on that island. And then in Canada, overnight Friday and Saturday morning is when the tropical storm force winds arrive, and you can see the core, everything over brown here is a 50% chance of seeing gale force winds over 40 miles per hour as the storm moves north. You can see this intersects both parts of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And if we look at the hurricane force wind swath, you'll see the difference for Bermuda here. Since the eye of the storm is expected to pass fairly to the northwest of the island, we have high chances of tropical storm force winds, but relatively lower, only 10% chance of hurricane force winds on this NHC forecast. But that does remain a possibility for winds to get that high. That would be 75 miles per hour or larger. And you can see the swath of probabilities extends even up into Canada because, again, this is a favorable interaction from the perspective of the storm transitioning into a non-tropical cyclone in a way that will keep it powerful. And so there's a 30+% chance of hurricane force winds even in portions of Canada as the storm makes landfall on Saturday. So that's about all for Fiona at this point. Everyone, please stay safe. We've seen severe impacts from the storm already from the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. Crazy flooding there. Our thoughts are with the people there as they try to recover and try to get power back and rebuild the infrastructure. Turks and Caicos also had hurricane force conditions, and we are now talking about Bermuda within the next couple of days, and then Canada after that. A wide-ranging impact storm Fiona has been and will continue to be throughout the rest of the week, so everyone please stay safe. We're going to talk now about Invest 98L. This is a system entering the Eastern Caribbean, and what you'll see here is that's a fairly disorganized system. There's scattered convection, thunderstorms near a wave axis. We'll see that there's southwesterly winds coming off of northeastern Venezuela, and then southerly winds coming toward Barbados, and then wrapping around to northeasterly winds to the west of the Windward Islands. So we see kind of this outlined large wave pocket in the surface wind. And what you'll notice is that this wave pocket is a little bit offset from the area of thunderstorms, which is more toward the southeast. And this is primarily due to southerly or northerly wind shear from Fiona, because you'll see some of these cirrus elements coming out of the north. This is outflow from Hurricane Fiona. I'll just show that briefly here. Fiona's outflow ridge pushing down on 98L. You can see that very clearly on the satellite loop. So this is going to be a source of wind shear for the coming days in the foreseeable future for 98L. And so this is a structure that we should get familiar with for the next couple of days. This means that most of the rain is currently pushed off kind of toward the south, but we have seen heavy showers rolling through the Windward Islands. And because there's some dry air on the north side due to the shear, we have seen these thunderstorms creating strong downdrafts, and we've seen gusts associated with those downdrafts over 50 miles per hour in places like Barbados over the last several hours. So definitely some gusty winds here, along with these heavy showers rolling through the islands. This is going to continue west or west-northwestward, not that far from South America, just north of Venezuela, and will continue through the Caribbean over the next few days, dealing with this wind shear as it goes. I'm going to show you a bunch of model forecasts now to try to parse this out. This is the European ensemble showing the mean forecast of 200 millibar wind in wind barbs here, and the low-level vorticity in coloring. So you'll see the area of rotation associated with 98L. Obviously, there's Hurricane Fiona, and the wind barbs you'll see coming out of Fiona illustrate that outflow coming down out of the north and northeast and hitting 98L right in the face on the north side. And this is going to continue for the next while as Fiona works to move northward and get out of the way. You'll see this continue even a day or two out. This is Thursday evening. You can still see that outflow coming right down over 98L. And even continuing into the early part of the weekend, you'll see that Fiona clears out, but we still maintain an upper level ridge with northeasterly flow over the central Caribbean. There's a big high right there to the north of Hispaniola, and 98L still getting northeasterly flow right over top of it, so still some shear. So that's 3 days and even maybe 4 days of this before getting to a point south of Jamaica where you start to see the area of rotation here underneath lighter easterly winds. So instead of 30, 40 knots out of the northeast over top of the system, we now have 15 knots out of the east, and you see an anticyclone beginning to become established right over top of where the system is located. This would represent a lower shear situation, and by the time this gets to the longitude of Jamaica or so and farther west, conditions will become markedly more favorable for development and intensification of 98L at this time. So we are expecting development at some point, but it's likely to be slow during the next 3 days or so. We can see the impact of the shear if we look at the mid-level moisture and flow plot. So again, obviously, there's Fiona, but we're looking at 98L here. There's a closed contour in MSLP in black indicating where the surface wave axis is. And again, you can see the moist pocket kind of off at the bottom of your screen here to the south, pushed there by the northerly shear and the dry air on the north side that results. So we're going to be watching this over the next few days on the model run, and you'll see that even as this enters the Caribbean, you'll notice that there's a closed contour here, a weak low trying to form at the surface on the model, but a lot of the main moisture and mid-level trough axis remains pushed off to the south. You'll see this continue to happen, and the northern side of the wave axis is where the surface low keeps trying to form, but the mid-level low is kind of offset a little bit from that toward the south, even through Saturday. But once we get to the longitude of Jamaica or so, you notice that this starts to develop into a more vertically stacked system with a more symmetric ball of moisture around it in response to the wind shear decreasing as we discussed. So as this continues toward the northwest here into the western part of the Caribbean beyond Jamaica, development is expected, and we've seen a consistent signal from the model runs that this will occur. And you see on this particular model run, we get a hurricane strength system nearing Cuba. Now, if we look at the GFS, we'll see kind of a similar story here, but the GFS is a little bit more aggressive, as it kind of naturally is. As we develop the system over the next couple of days, we see a lot more closed contours in black on the GFS, indicating a stronger surface low developing right away during the next couple of days. But you will notice there's some whiter colors here, not dark green. So there is still this shear on the GFS pushing the mid-level low to the south, closer to the coast of Venezuela. but it still tries to amplify the surface low a lot more than the European model does. Reality will likely be between these two models. The GFS tends to be a little aggressive. If I show you, for example, the state of the system on Thursday afternoon, and then I show you the last couple of model runs on the GFS, you'll see that on prior runs, the system was actually much stronger on yesterday's forecasts at this time, and there was actually a GFS run that thought this would be a near hurricane passing through the Windward Islands today, but that's clearly not the case. So just to illustrate that the GFS is a little bit over-aggressive on the development timeline and will likely be too fast here. So you see a bona fide tropical storm on the GFS sooner than you see it on the European model. Reality will likely be between the timing on these two models, but the overall narrative is the same, that conditions get very favorable in the northwestern Caribbean on the GFS, just like they do on all the other models, and we're likely to see strong development once the system gets into this region. The tricky part here is exactly what the track will look like moving through the Caribbean, because the presence of this wind shear during this transit through the Caribbean causes a lot of track uncertainty in the modeling. And that's because when you're going back here like this, when you have this belt of northeasterly flow, even in the mid-levels, trying to push the mid-level guts of the system toward the south, if the system is trying to develop during that situation, like it does here on the GFS, then it suddenly gets deeper as it gets stronger and feels that push out of the northeast. And in this particular case, a system that develops quickly might deviate a little bit farther to the south before that shear lets up and allows it to turn north. Whereas perhaps a weaker system continues to ride toward the northwest along with the surface trade winds a little bit more. And so there's a spread on exactly how far north or south the system may track by the time it gets to the vicinity of Jamaica. And so we have a wide-ranging set of possible solutions on the ensemble forecasts for this system. I'm going to show you both the European and the GFS ensemble briefly, and this plot is going to show you each red number is a potential location of 98L according to the ensemble, and you can see this envelope grow to a large size rather quickly. So even by Sunday, we're talking about potential for locations moving toward Nicaragua or locations up by Jamaica itself, a rather wide range here, indicating the struggles with predicting exactly where within this large envelope 98L will consolidate in the face of that shear. And so you can see this results again in a large cloud that generally moves into the northwestern Caribbean, but where exactly in this circle, anyone's guess at this particular point, because we haven't seen the system develop just yet, and that makes things tough. This is the GFS ensemble showing the same thing. Just to illustrate that again, there's quite a spread here, a large ellipse of possible locations by Sunday extending from Hispaniola to Nicaragua. And you even see a group of members move up across eastern Cuba and into the Bahamas. So there's a lot of variance in the forecasts at this point. And worth reminding, this is 6 days out at this particular point in the forecast. Lots of uncertainty is natural here in cases like this. And so we really don't know where 98L is going yet. The big thing we're going to watch for is when this starts consolidating. Right now we have a broad wave envelope in a sheared situation. So as this moves westward to the north of Venezuela, if we see it consolidate by the time it gets south of Hispaniola or toward Jamaica, that's when we'll start locking in the track forecast in the Caribbean, because we'll see where it consolidates, where it tightens up, and the models will have a much better handle on it at that point. But right now, all we can generally say is that it's going to move through the Caribbean, and where it ends up on the western side of it, not entirely sure just yet. Now, I do want to talk about briefly the forecast beyond the Caribbean, because I know there will be lots of questions about a potential threat to areas like, Mexico, Belize, Cuba, the southern U.S. These are places where, yes, if a hurricane is developing in the Western Caribbean, we always have to worry about here. And if we look at the 500 millibar steering flow on the European ensemble mean for 5 days out, so this is on Sunday night, Monday morning, we'll see a reflection of where the storm likely is, that envelope of possibilities kind of outlined in yellow there. The big feature of note here is this big trough that you can see on the north side of your screen over the eastern U.S. And this has been a consistently forecasted feature by most global models, a big, massive trough that digs in. And you can see that the steering ridge to the north of the storm has an edge near the longitude of Florida, and it kind of opens up some sort of alley for the storm to potentially turn northward into the Gulf of Mexico. It does depend on exactly where it is. For example, if some of the forecasts for it to move toward Nicaragua are correct, it could just stay down here and move into Central America. But if it is a little bit farther north of Nicaragua and Honduras, then a curve of some sort, whether it's over the Yucatan or over Cuba or somewhere in between, could be possible in a steering pattern like this. You'll see that this trough kind of sets that edge and then draws this yellow blob more toward the north by the end of this forecast at day 6, and that trough you can see is slow to clear out. It's still there. Now, a couple of bigger points here are that if this does move into the Gulf of Mexico, it doesn't necessarily mean that conditions will be perfect for it, and hopefully there will be some impediments. For example, with a trough like this sitting here for multiple days as the hurricane is turning, this subsidence flow on the back side of the trough from the north will deposit a large dry air mass near the southern U.S. and North Gulf Coast. So any hurricane that moves up will be pulling that dry air mass in, and that would hopefully be an inhibitor. We will also have strong westerly flow on the base of that trough that could impart some wind shear on any kind of hurricane that tries to come north. So hopefully there will be some limitations, but it could be a powerful storm nonetheless. If it develops in the Caribbean and becomes strong here, it will likely remain something to deal with if it moves north. At this point, though, we don't have a lot of details on what this portion of the forecast could look like. And like I talked about, we need to see where it is when it consolidates here in the western part of the Caribbean. Where we're really going to know things is probably when it gets to the longitude of Jamaica. Once it reaches this point in 3 to 4 days, then we'll have the launching point for where the storm actually exists, if one indeed forms. And once we know where it is, we'll be able to predict better where it goes from there based on the model forecasts and the steering conditions that we see at that time. So for now, it's something to just keep an eye on. If you're in places like the Western Caribbean and the Southern US, it is the peak of the hurricane season. You should have a hurricane plan ready. If you don't, you should probably make one just in case. We have several weeks of activity left to go, and for all we know, 98L will cause problems in just a few days from now. So that's about it for this video. Again, we have 4 systems: Hurricane Fiona, 98L. We have another wave behind, which isn't an imminent threat to land right now, but we may talk about it in the future if it tries to develop. And Tropical Storm Gaston, which may bring some impacts to the Azores Islands. Again, please see the National Hurricane Center for details on that storm, and see the Canadian Hurricane Center and the Weather Office in Canada for local information on impacts up there from Fiona, as this will be moving up and local bulletins will be posted by them for Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and the other provinces in Atlantic Canada. So everyone, please stay safe, have a plan in case these storms impact you, and that's it for now. Thanks for watching.